Hello everybody and welcome to Learning at Work Week with Bailey and French. It's great to have you all here with us today. Just to give you a little bit of a background about Bailey and French. So we are a consultancy based in Brighton, specialising in positive psychology. So we use the latest research to support organisations with leadership, performance, team relationships and wellbeing across both the public and private sectors. Our mission is to humanise the world of work, so it's only right that today's session is all about human leadership and how that is driving inclusive cultures. But before we start, I'd just like to let you know that we love all of our sessions to be as interactive as possible, so we will be asking questions throughout the session. So don't be afraid to share your thoughts in the chat, any questions that you've got. You won't see any responses at the moment, but we will be sending out key slides and any themes and questions and answers after the webinar. If I could have the next slide, please, Rachel. Okay, so as you can see in the pictures, I'm Renee. I'm a business psychologist and consultant here at Bailey and French, presenting alongside my colleague, Holly. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, Holly.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to see some of you on the call. You might have seen me on a couple of the other webinars that we've been doing as part of Learning at Work Week. So yeah, nice to be back again with you, Renee. Very excited for today's session.
Very excited. I think you've got one later on in the week as well, haven't you?
We do. I'm back again on Thursday, so you can't get rid of me, but I can't stop talking. So here we are.
Okay, so to kick off today's session, I'd like to start off with a positive starter activity. So this is something that we do at the start of all of our workshops, just as an energizer to get everyone on a positive note, encourage people to start thinking more positively and set the tone for the rest of the session. So if you could just look at the questions on screen, take a moment to reflect on that. So think about a time that you think about a great leader that you've worked with before or heard of in the past. So how did they make you feel included, and how did this impact your performance and well-being? Holly, in the meantime, so please share in the chat. But in the meantime, do you have any examples, Holly?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I've always got sort of so many different things running through my head because obviously it's such a big question. And there's so many different ways that people can make you feel included. But I think one of the biggest ones for me is having a great leader that I've worked with that's been super open and transparent and a really, really good communicator. So sort of not hiding things, being as open as possible to make sure that I'm included in, what's going on. I'm feeling like I know things, as they're happening and not sort of being left as sort of an afterthought. So I think that's probably the example that I can think of first and foremost. I'm so excited to see some of the answers from other people in the session coming through in the question box as well. So feel free to keep sending those in the question box. But Renee, do you have an example that you can think of?
Yeah, I think transparency is a big one for me as well. Something that definitely makes me feel a lot more included is just knowing that we're all on the same page. There's not any information that I don't have, or and as well, actually, something that I think that we do quite well here at Bailey and French is just giving people a voice, and opportunities to speak up. So as an example, we do have at the all hands meeting, Alex, our CEO, will always start off by giving everyone the opportunity to ask questions at the beginning of the session. So it just helps us feel as though, or me personally, like we've got the opportunity to have our voices heard, and then the session's often tailored around the kind of things that we're thinking about or the things that are on our mind. So that's something that helps me feel quite included. And yeah, so is there any thoughts, any questions coming through?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of different examples, which I think also link to what we've been talking about as well, in terms of being treated sort of as a unique individual and sort of taking time to really understand them as a person. We've got an example in here about being given autonomy by someone that they worked with, and trusting them as experts. So sort of letting go some of that control as a leader and really empowering everybody else around them, is another way of really making people feel included, and also just listening, asking open-ended questions. It's very much just that approach, I think, to communication and collaboration that's so important, and some of those really easy things that can help people feel included. So acknowledging what's been going on, sort of pointing out what you observed them doing well and what people bring to the team. So again, it's that value, that respect, to make sure that you're including people. So we're starting to see that through in some of the question function, that's coming through. And so yeah, keep sharing, but it's good to hear that we've got lots of good examples of leadership already being seen and observed.
Yeah, that's great. So if Rachel, if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So what is human leadership? So this is our approach that we use to help leaders and managers become their best selves at work. So just before that we delve deeper into human leadership, first of all, I'd like us to just take a step back and explore a few of the common myths that we have around leadership. So society has actually just, taught us to have biases and misconceptions about what it takes to be a good leader. But oftentimes the research just, well, they're just myths, essentially. So Holly, if I could pass on to you, and take us through the next slide, which is all about the common leadership myths.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're completely right that we're all shaped by our experiences of leadership and of management. And so then we have different understandings or preconceptions of what we think a good leader should do. And that's not necessarily, accurate. Is not necessarily what a good leader needs to look like now and in the future. Times have changed quite a lot. And sometimes if we've not had great leadership role models, then sometimes, how we view them can be sort of tarnished by that. So what we just wanted to cover off really before we get into what does a human leader actually look like from our perspective, actually start to think about what is a human leader not, almost, so flipping it on its head. So sometimes we have these sort of preconceptions, these myths that we think leaders have to have all the answers. Again, as I said, this is a myth. It's not necessarily the case. And we do know that research shows leaders who draw on the knowledge, the skills, the experience of other people rather than thinking that they know everything and that their way is the best way, that is much more effective. And I think we've seen that come through in some of the examples that people have shared to that first question. The second point here, that leaders must be extroverts. This one is particularly pertinent to me because I am not an extrovert. I'm definitely an introvert, and I like to think I could be a great leader nonetheless. So yeah, again, we're debunking that myth. We know that introverts have a lot of other skills and strengths that they can bring to the leadership role. You don't need to be an extrovert. You can be an extrovert. We're just not going to say whether one is better than the other because both are equally as good. On the third point there, so suggesting that leaders shouldn't or can't show vulnerability, that they should sort of always be strong, always be positive. Again, we've all got a lot of stress. We've all gone through a very, very difficult time. And we do know that if leaders start to show vulnerability in sort of an effective way, that actually you create that psychological safety for those around you to also be vulnerable and be authentic, and show that it's okay to go through a challenge or go through a difficulty. And that everybody should be a little bit more themselves at work. The next 2 points are sort of related. So leadership is all about results and leaders must never fail. So always sort of getting things spot on. Again, we're debunking this myth. We know that good leaders should be looking after their people and results come if you look after your people. People are your best assets, your greatest case story. So if you look after your people first and give them sort of those psychologically safe, positive environments, you'll get the results. They will always follow. But even if you do fail, have that growth mindset, learn from your mistakes, learn from failures, and do better next time. And encouraging everybody to have that growth mindset, whether you're a leader or you're not a leader. And then finally, leaders should always be on or always at peak performance. But again, we all have different strengths, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. We talked about it on our webinar yesterday, and we'll talk about it again going through the week, because strengths is a big topic through everything that we do. But we all have different strengths, so let's be open and honest about what our strengths are. Sometimes we have to do things that don't necessarily play to our strengths, in which case, as a leader, we might not be what is perceived as on, in quotation marks. So it's just being open and honest and being happy to admit if you're not necessarily at your best performance. Why? So those are some of those myths about leadership. You might have others in your mind when you're listening through these. You might have experiences of these. We've actually got a question in the chat here. So what behaviors and strengths do you think leaders will need to lean into more in the future? And we are absolutely going to move on to that in the next part of the webinar in terms of those behaviors, those strengths, those skills that make up a human leader. So we'll be coming on to that very shortly. We've got some very keen beans in the audience, so it's super exciting that people are already engaged. But yeah, so this is what we're trying to avoid, these myths, before we go into thinking about actually what is a human leader.
So before we go into how to define human leadership, I'd like to just pose that question to you. So what do you think human leadership means, based on what you've learned about leadership and the myths that we often mistake for what makes a great leader? So what do you think human leadership means? What kind of characteristics does a human leader have?
You're posing a big question there, Renee. Big question. I love it.
Big question. Any thoughts, guys?
So empathy has come through 3 times in a row. So I'm guessing that's quite a big one that people are thinking about. So that empathy piece, being compassionate. We've got emotional intelligence coming through, being authentic, being yourself, building trust, coaching approach, which is a really, really interesting one. Coaching approach is something we talk about a lot here. Something that we do see as really, really important. We've got trust. We've got balancing goals with well-being. So again, balancing sort of that performance element with the more sort of people compassionate side of things. Accessibility, I think, is a really, really interesting one that's come through actually. Which links to a lot of sort of D&I strategies that are at the forefront at the moment. A lot of leaders are having to think about that and sort of move forward in the inclusivity space. So that accessibility piece, I think, is hugely topical and again, very, very important. We've got approachable, we've got visionary as well. So lots about sort of that inspiring, but also being people wanting to come to you as a leader. And just a reminder that unfortunately, based on the setup of the webinar platform, you won't necessarily see other people's comments right now, but what we will do is email you round with a little document that summarizes people's comments and questions and themes. So we'll send that to you afterwards so you can see what other people have been saying.
Yeah, I think that you're right with that accessibility point. I think that's something that is definitely a characteristic of human leadership, and actually is something that I would look for in a leader, and just to feel like they are present, I guess, as well. But so to give you, if I could just have the next slide, please. So we'd just like to give you a better idea of how we came up to define human leadership. So this is based on years of research into different topics and concepts and approaches that support the empowerment of people through leadership. So as you can see, the first one we've got is the Daniel Goleman's model of emotional intelligence. So here we're referring to the 4 pillars that make an emotionally intelligent leader. So we've got self-awareness, other awareness, self-management and relationship management. So this is about a leader who's better able to understand themselves, their emotions and their actions and how they affect others. But also as well, using that to relate to others and connect with others to create a space for everyone to thrive. So what kind of things would we look for in an emotionally intelligent leader? That kind of pieces back to that comment about accessibility. So for me, I would say, for example, active listening, someone being present when they interact with others and knowing when to take a step back to let others thrive, and also when to actually step up to support. which can be quite a fine line to determine. I think that's where that emotional intelligence and self-awareness and other awareness is so important. Which kind of takes us on nicely to the next approach, which is about servant leadership. So servant leadership, this is about putting others first, being an enabler essentially, and allowing other people to develop and flourish and perform at their best behind aside of your own interests. If we go on to servant leadership, stewardship, this is about operating in service rather than in control of those around you. Holly, sorry to put you on the spot, but do you have any examples of stewardship in your, any examples? Okay, so strengths-based leadership is the next point. So at Bailey and French, we're all about strengths-based leadership. So what do we do? Well, we do a lot of work around strengths internally. So as teams, we try and, so for example, we have a strengths matrix where we are mapping onto, we map everybody's strengths together and use that to help everyone collaborate together. So as a leader, this is about understanding your own strengths and being able to use that to impact your leadership style and where you should maximize and minimize those to get the best out of yourself and others. Finally, moving on to authentic leadership and inclusive leadership. So authentic leadership is all about embracing our true selves as a leader and drawing our values and principles to guide our leadership and others. So inclusive leadership is about acknowledging our biases and actively seeking those out, seeking out differences in others and being able to use that to inform decision making. So this is really important for everyone to feel like they have the opportunity to contribute and they all have a voice and feel valued. So overall, as you can see, there's a lot of research that's gone into creating the human leadership approach. We've put this into 4 key areas of development of what it takes to become a human leader. So if you look at the first option here on the right hand side, we've got authenticity. So this is about someone who's highly self-aware, knows who they are, knows their strengths and their weaknesses. Inclusivity, so this is about a leader who's highly aware of others and they're curious without judging, but also they're able to just put their bias aside and recognize value the uniqueness in others. So the third point, moving on, is role modeling. So this is someone who's able, I would say, to walk the walk. And I guess it's the opposite of do as I say and not as I do. So this is someone who actually role models and demonstrates the behaviours that they desire in the workplace. So we've got the authenticity, the inclusion that's going to create an environment for everyone to get the best out of everyone. And then finally, we've got human connection. So this is a leader who is able to and confident in building and also managing relationships with their teams, with other people, and actually being able to connect others. So fostering an environment where everyone's able to connect with each other, and also I guess it just creates a network of support, having an environment that values those strong working relationships. So now I've given you an overview of how we came to define human leadership. If I could now have the next slide, please, because now I'd like you all to reflect on why human leadership is important. So if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so when we're thinking about why human leadership is important, we want to focus on the impact that it's having on 3 main areas. So we've got people, teams, and the organisation as a whole. So among people, We often see less burnout, greater resilience, less absenteeism, and lower staff turnover. Among teams, we've got higher individual and team engagement, high productivity. So this is about creating an organisation that can function faster. And actually, you know, when we've got continuous learning, faster decision making, more creative problem solving, it leads to a greater an organisation that's more agile, essentially. But what we've found looking at what's underlying all of these outcomes on is the impact that it's having on a human level. So it's about creating this sense of belonging and feelings of inclusion that empowers people, teams, and organisations. So I'd now like to take a moment to think about why human leadership is important for driving inclusive cultures. So if you could all just reflect on that statement for a moment, please. Why is human leadership important for driving inclusive cultures?
Another big question, Renee.
Definitely.
I think for me, if we're thinking about inclusion and human leadership, I definitely feel more included if I feel like I really know who my leader is and they know who I am. So it's very much that two-way relationship. And it'd be interesting to see in that question box if anyone agrees or anyone's got any other sort of further suggestions for why human leadership, now we know a bit more about what that is, why that has such a clear link to inclusion. And that probably goes over and above just the inclusivity part of human leadership. But yeah, for me, it's that authenticity piece. It's a two-way relationship where we both, you know, have a mutual understanding of each other as unique individuals, and therefore we recognize those differences and celebrate those more than anything. Yeah, it's not, for me, it's not just about recognizing that there are differences, but that celebration piece is absolutely critical, I think.
100%. So if I could get the next slide, please. Okay, so now we're just going to explore a little bit further in more detail ways that human leadership is helping to enable more inclusive cultures. So what have we seen in relation to this? So if we could have the first point, it's a way of giving everyone a voice. So human leaders value uniqueness and just the seeking insight from other people and the ability to, I guess, be non-judgmental in that. So they role model authenticity as well, which often, you know, creates the opportunity for people to feel like they can be themselves, which definitely helps them have the confidence to speak up. I mean, at the end of the day, organisations won't be able to harness the power of diversity without inclusion. So without inclusion, efforts around diversity just become ineffective, essentially. People can't be them if people don't feel like they can be themselves. They're not going to be able to speak up and share their opinions, and the business isn't going to benefit from that. So, and also as well, the people won't be happy. So if everyone feels like they have to fit a mold in order to be included, yeah, people aren't going to be happy and the business isn't going to benefit from that either. So as well, we're also seeing a sense of belonging. So human leaders are able to build that sense of belonging through their ability to build and maintain strong relationships. If I could have the next point, please. And we're also seeing increased enjoyment and performance. So human leaders empower others and increase enjoyment and performance when people feel their best. They're able to perform their best. All of the research points in towards that direction. And also as well, we tend to just, I mean, you don't even need to look at the research to know, like when you feel your best, when you're doing work that's engaging, when you're around people that you get on with and you've got connections with, you feel your best and you often perform their best. The next point, please. So next we've got authenticity and honesty. So human leaders are able to role model authenticity and inclusion. So this is passed on to others through their behaviour in the workplace and interactions with others. And it just, as I mentioned before, creates an environment where everyone can be themselves without fear of persecution, which is really important for creating that environment where every individual, regardless of unique differences and backgrounds and everything else, can have equal opportunities to thrive. As well, on top of this, we're also seeing that human leadership has a massive impact on retention. So people want to stay in companies where they feel a sense of belonging, where they're respected and empowered, and also, where their personal growth supported and they're actually just able to connect with others on a human level. I think that's what's most important. So moving on, have we got any comments coming in, Holly?
Yeah, so I think we're moving on now to thinking about actually what are our leaders facing, the challenges that they're going through. It can sometimes be quite difficult to be a human leader, and we've got some experiences with what our leaders are going through with the organisations and the clients that we're talking to, but would love to hear from everybody on the group. We've got a range of private sector organisations, public sector organisations, civil service, NHS, police, all on this call. So feel free to use that question box again and share those answers to what you think the challenges of your leaders are, which can, get in the way of them maybe being more of a human leader, because sometimes, our focus is taken. So pop your thoughts and reflections in that question box. I'd love to see your personal experiences of what you think leaders are struggling with. We've got some answers coming through already. So the Great Resignation was the very first one that came in, and I think everybody can agree with that. It's very much a term that we're all hearing sort of every day, very much over LinkedIn and the news and things like that. So a big one around talent, keeping talent, finding talent, and nurturing them, which, is quite simply related to human leadership, because if we're a human leader, that perhaps becomes easier to keep them. We've got leaders struggling with their own personal issues. I think that's really an important one there, in terms of, as a leader, it can sometimes be easy to focus on other people and not really focusing on yourself, particularly when it comes to that well-being piece. So that's definitely a challenge that leaders are facing. Hybrid working, time pressure, workloads, again, a lot of these things that we're hearing lots and lots, through COVID, following COVID, even before COVID. There's a lot of work to do. Leaders have a lot of responsibility, a lot of different hats that they have to wear. And that can be difficult then to give everything due sort of time and attention as well. If we move on to the next slide, please, what we've done is we've also just dropped in some of our own insights as well, in terms of the challenges that we're hearing about, which I think very much linked to what you've been sharing. And please do feel free to keep sharing any others that you can think of, because we will be sending around, as I said, a summary of your responses that you've been sharing in that question box. So anything else you can think of, pop it down. But from our perspective, this is what we're hearing. So things that leaders are struggling with, as we've already mentioned, leading remote and hybrid teams. And we do know that there's a big pull from employers to bring people back into the office, and sort of a big push from employees in terms of them not necessarily wanting to come back and wanting to be either hybrid or fully remote. The second one, which we've talked a lot around in terms of DE&I strategies, and I'm adding belonging in there as well as sort of that fourth pillar, but keeping those at the forefront of your mind as leaders, and we need leaders to role model those behaviours. DE&I is becoming a huge focus, with lots of interventions and strategies that we need to follow to build those inclusive environments. Also seeing that we need leaders and managers to be much more proactive and taking more accountability for having difficult conversations. It can be quite easy to shy away from them, especially when we're in a virtual world of work. But actually we want our leaders and our managers to be stepping up and really having those effectively, but also having conversations to stop sort of any performance issues from happening, and taking a bit more of that proactive approach. And then finally, we've got a couple of other points here around a lot of new leaders, a lot of first-time managers, where people have a lot of excellent technical skills, but actually might need some more development and growth opportunities to support their sort of people management skills, and sort of that, I don't want to say soft skills. Soft skills is a phrase that I actually can't stand, but that, you know what I mean when I say that phrase, in terms of those having conversations, and that side of management and leadership, which they might not be used to. And it's how do we, grow and upskill our leaders to be able to be sort of all-rounders in that respect. And I apologise, you might be able to hear a siren in the background behind me. We're in Brighton, very, very busy, lots of sirens all the time. And then finally, we come down to managing underperformance, and I've sort of already talked about this, and it links to some of the other points, but really proactively managing performance so that you can try and stop things before there is an issue, but having that effective approach to dealing with it if there is any issues with underperformance, because if you don't deal with it in the right way, it can have a negative impact on colleagues. And if you do want to find out more about that final bullet point, we did do a webinar about performance motivation yesterday, so I'm going to do a little shameless plug for that. We've got a recording. Let us know if you want to hear more about supporting performance generally, but from a leader perspective, that's sort of that final challenge that we're seeing as well. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. We also just have here some of our learnings in terms of when we've been working with leaders and offering sort of growth and development opportunities, what are the things that we've noticed? Because offering learning and development and training, or whatever you want to call it, is really, really important, and we need to keep doing that. We know that those opportunities keep people in roles, keep people happy, because growth is really, really important for that. And what we've seen is that leaders do really relish that opportunity to take a step away from their day-to-day role. As people have already mentioned in that question box, there's lots of work pressures, lots of competing demands, lots of things taking their attention. So really a chance to sit down and think about something else that's for them and their personal growth and development. They really love that. It's something that's really, really important to them. Something else that's really important as we go through sort of learning and development interventions with leaders is around building and maintaining great relationships. That's something that they are really, really focused on, to make sure that they can, have their great teams around them as a leadership sort of cadre, that they've got good relationships there. There's always a lot of focus and a lot of talk about how they can make the most of the relationships that they've got. Which sort of links into that third bullet point. So balancing sort of those people related aspects and the relationships with the sort of strategy and objective related aspects as well. So again, we've already talked about this, but sort of that balancing act between the different hats that they have to wear, and thinking about performance and goals and strategy versus some of that more pastoral relationship based element of being a leader. And then finally, learning for leaders and managers is often used to create a consistency in approach. And with the human leadership element, what's really worth calling out here is that whilst some element of consistency is important, so we do want lots of human leaders within our organisation to create that safe space, to create that inclusive environment. So we don't want to see there sort of be tensions between some human leaders and some leaders who might not be acting in such a human way. So that element of consistency is important, but also recognising that we need that flexible, adaptable approach as well. We've all got personal styles, and we want to, as part of the whole inclusion piece and authentic pieces, to make sure that we're really embracing those differences in personal style while creating some level of consistency. And that's where sort of human leadership can really come alive, because we're talking about authenticity, but we're also talking about some of those other key skills as a leader that we can create more consistency in. And that's just some of our insights. As I said, if you've got any more insights that you've thought of as I've talked through that, do keep popping them into the question box. We'll send that round. But just, some of our learning about what we're seeing in the leadership group and why human leadership, again, is such an important approach. And that's me. So if we can move on to the next slide, please.
That's great. Thanks, Holly. So thank you. So to wrap up today's webinar, I just first of all wanted to take everyone through one of our activities that's on the Human Leadership Programme. So to start with, before the activity, so we're going to take a pulse check. So this is just a short, simple poll, and it will give you an idea of where you currently stand against the 4 pillars of human leadership. So if you look at the questions on screen, you can see that the first one is actually based around authenticity. The second one is about inclusivity, and the third one relates to role modeling, and the fourth one is about human connection. So I think the answer, am I right in saying that the answers will be displayed, but they are anonymous?
Yes, that's correct. So you can see it on the screen there. Have a vote, have a self-reflect of where you think you are on that first statement. The results are anonymous, but we can share back what the average scores are and just see how the group is feeling across each one of the 4 statements.
Okay, great. So yeah, we do these before and after all of our workshops, and it just, gives us an idea of the kind of things that we need to focus on, our delegates need to focus on, and what they need to, well, I guess how they've improved throughout the session or throughout the program. So if you could please answer the questions, are the polls coming through?
Yeah, we're seeing a big range of scores coming through. We've got scores across all of the spectrum 1 to 5. Probably should have specified, but I'm guessing most of you have understood this, that 1 is low and 5 is high. Should have said that up front, but looks like you've all got the hang of it. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of range of scores with an average of 4 coming out as sort of that most common score there. And I'm going to close the first poll just so that we've got time to go through each of the others. I'm going to open up the second poll now, which is all about inclusivity. So again, have a reflect, have an answer, see where you're at in terms of that statement. You can see some answers coming through. So again, we've got a range of scores across the different spectrum from 2 to 5, but I think we're sitting at 3 as the average score here for this one, so slightly lower than the first statement, but that might be to be expected. The first statement is a bit more about our own understanding of ourselves, which can sometimes be easier than thinking about understanding of other people, and that way to create inclusivity is a bit more of a tricky topic to get our head around. So understandable that we might be sitting at a slightly different place for this poll. So I'm going to close the second one. Going to move on to the third poll here. So this one about being a role model. So I feel like I'm able to manage my own behaviour as a leader. Again, have a vote, have a reflect, 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. Where do you think you sit on this poll? And this poll might be a bit difficult because it can depend on circumstance. I will give everybody that. I was just thinking, what would my answer be? And then I was thinking, well, maybe it depends on the situation. So maybe a little bit broad, but we're going to go with it because we're here now. But again, 4 is coming out as the significant front runner here. So people are feeling pretty confident in managing their own behavior as a leader. So again, we might see that it's sometimes easier to think about ourselves and sort of our own self-management. And it can be a bit more difficult to take that sort of other lens. So I'm going to close this one and open the final poll just so that we've done the full spectrum. So this one is all about human connectors. So the connection in my work relationships is meaningful. Again, have a vote, have a think. It could be dependent on context again, but just take a general average, because one of the important things with these types of polls is that you check in with them fairly frequently. So it's not sort of a do it once and then forget about it. We create these to be super simple, super easy, but something that you can keep coming back to see where your scores change and where you might want to focus energy and time on developing and growing. And finally, again, we've got a full range of the answers here from 1 to 5, 4 coming out as the average score. So we're doing fairly well. Got a good group here, but definitely, start to think about where we might want to learn more, to develop more. Now we've had a sense check of these different aspects of human leadership. So thank you, everybody, for taking part in those polls. Just a reminder, they are anonymous, and I'm going to close them now so we can finish up for the session.
Thank you, Holly. So next, I think we've got a reflective question. So this is something that we use to help you start putting human leadership into practice. So please, could you imagine you have a new starter in your team who's finding it difficult to fit in after being with you for a month, and how would you respond as a manager or a leader. So in that, we're thinking about all the 4 pillars of human leadership, and how would you kind of implement that in this kind of scenario. If you can share in the chat any suggestions there, how you might start putting that into practice. So in our sessions, we would usually use this as an opportunity to use Microsoft Teams, the breakout rooms in Microsoft Teams, just to get everyone talking and discussing. It's quite helpful, like having leaders get together and just knowledge sharing, and also there's an element of accountability there as well. So they're often, like, people often say that it's an opportunity to just connect with others and problem solve together. And I think it kind of helps to build a network of support for after the workshop. I guess just if you're all having gone through it together and kind of keeping each other accountable and setting actions for commitment for after the session. So is there anything coming through?
Yeah, we've got a few suggestions here. So having one-to-ones, making sure you're checking in on them. So, appreciating having that proactive approach. So not just letting it fester or waiting for that person to come to you, but being proactive and reaching out to them. There's some, further flavour there around having it as an informal, supportive discussion, so that you can start to find out what their experience has been, what they're finding challenging, and start to ask them what support they need. So definitely that inclusion piece coming through there in terms of asking them and sort of giving them the space to share what they feel like they need, rather than making any assumptions on their sort of behalf. Again, lots of sort of creating that safe space, opening up the conversation. Open questions has been called out, so very, very good there. So that coaching approach, open questions, let's really try and get a conversation flowing and build that trust. You never know what it might be. It could be something at home, it could be something at work. So you need to make sure that they feel they trust you enough to start to open up, so that you can help them. We've also got some suggestions here. So as well as a leader or a manager, you sort of having that one-to-one time with them, you could also organise some team time, so a team lunch or a team coffee, so that people get to know each other on a less formal level. So human connectors coming through there as a human leader. So building those connections with yourself and that person, but people within the team as well, to extend and create that network of support. Because as a leader, it's not all on you, as we know, and as we've discussed, it's all about empowering and getting other people in the team to sort of step up and take some of that accountability and responsibility too. So lots of good suggestions coming through. Again, we'll pop them round in case anyone's interested to see them. We'll share what's come out of there in a little flyer to share afterwards, after the session. But thank you all for sharing.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Like Holly said, we will be sending those around, any key themes and answers to your questions that you might have. But yeah, thank you everyone for attending. We are just coming up towards the end of the session now, so I hope you are all able to learn something new that you can take away. As well, please keep an eye out for the LinkedIn page, Bailey and French LinkedIn page, and our YouTube channel. We do have lots of other content like this for you to watch back as well. I'd also like to invite you to complete the questionnaire. So as you can see, there's a QR code on the screen. I think Holly will also be inserting the survey link into the chat in case you don't want to use the QR code, and just complete that if you please complete that. Just to give us some feedback. And then once again, feel free to get in touch with me or Holly. Our email addresses are there on screen. And yeah, so I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the day. Let us know if you have any more questions. Please complete the survey link. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everybody. It's been really, really great to hear your thoughts. So thank you for being open and sharing with us. We'll stay on for a couple of minutes if anyone's got any final questions.